Parshas Kisisa, which is this week's reading, read about the Machzah Shekel, that every Jew, male, above the age of 20, had an obligation to give a half a silver coin, and these coins were used specifically to purchase the communal offerings, known as Korbanei Tibbur. That's what these coins were used for. And the Torah makes it a point, when it came to the building of the Mishkan, there were many materials that were needed. We discussed 13 materials: Zov, Chesed, and Nechoshes, gold, silver, copper, and many other materials. As long as you gave with the generosity of your heart, you give as much as you want. But when we speak with the Machzah Shekel, which was used specifically for the communal offerings, as we say, the Korbanei Tibbur, everybody uniformly gives that half a silver coin. It says, Osher lo yarbe, the wealthy man does not give more, v'adal lo yamit, and the poor man does not give less than the half a silver coin. There's this uniformity, which is interesting. Usually when you want to raise money, there's nothing wrong with having excess or surplus of money. When it comes to the Korbanei Tibbur, there's not even the question. Nobody contributed to a greater degree or to a lesser degree. There's this uniformity, meaning for some reason there's no identity. Nobody has an identity when it comes to Tibbur. Now there's a word from Rabbi Simcha Dvinsk on Shabbos Chazon, which is the Shabbos right before Tisha B'Av. We read about the Navi gives Musar to Klal Yisrael, to explain to them why the Beis Hamikdash is being destroyed. And he refers to it, to the incense offering, as Ketores Shov. It's a worthless Ketores. The incense offering has no value. Now, the question is, why does it have no value? So he explains over there that the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of sinas chinam, unwarranted hate. What does hate cause? It's a breakdown of the unity of society. Everybody has his own reason, and I have my reason why not to participate with you. Each of us have our own agenda. The unification of Klal Yisrael, the whole concept of Vayichan, when we camped at the foot of Sinai, the Torah tells us it was in the singular. As we said earlier, Rashi cites the Chazal, it was Ki'ish echad b'leiv echad, like one person unified in mind and heart. That was Klal, that was Kabbalah Satorah. Vayichan in the singular. We were unified. And we pointed out that that was a prerequisite for us to be qualified to receive the Torah at Sinai. We needed that level of unity. So we'd explained then, the reason was that just as Hashem is Echod, that's the unity of God, we have to reflect this characteristic of oneness, of unity. So therefore, if we wouldn't have had that particular characteristic of Vayichan in the singular, Ki'ish echad b'leiv echad, one person unified in mind, in perspective, in heart, we wouldn't have been qualified to have the relationship with Hashem. That's why the Torah goes out of its way to make it a point in the singular rather than in the plural. Now, what is the difference between a community, a tzibur, and a yochid? Community means we all are committed to an objective, and we all contribute to that objective. Nobody has his own identity. A partnership, what we call in Hebrew, shutfus, a partnership, you have so much percentage, I have a percentage. I may have a 1%, I may have a fraction of percent, but I have my identity in the totality of the ownership or whatever this may be. Two people could bring a korban in partnership. For instance, you want to bring a peace offering in partnership. It's valid. You want to bring a burnt offering, it's valid. But a korban tzibur, but a communal offering, nobody has any identity. It's what we call the community. It belongs to the community. It's a representation of the Jewish people in their entirety. Now, the Ketores, the incense offering, had 11 ingredients. One of the ingredients was chelbina. Chelbina was a foul-smelling herb that if you would burn it by itself, it had a terrible smell. But if you would coalesce it with the other 10 ingredients of the Ketores, being coalesced, not only would you not notice its foul smell, it would bring out the most beautiful fragrances of the other spices that the Ketores, that the incense offering was comprised of. So if it's unified, it's coalesced, it's mixed, and it's intermingled, then the chelbina, because it doesn't have its own identity, it brings out the most beautiful scent and fragrance of the others. But if it's by itself, which is due to a breakdown of the unity of Klal Yisrael, so then the chelbina is by itself. That means people take on their own identity. There's you and there's the other person, and not every people are far from perfect. If we're unified as a Klal Yisrael, so nobody could be identified as an individual based on his record. It's the sum total of Klal Yisrael. That's Tibbur. Due to sinas chinam, which was the cause of destruction of Tzek Beis Hamikdash, unwarranted hate, that was the cause of the fractionalization of Klal Yisrael. As a result of that, the Navi says to Klal Yisrael, it's due to the Ketores Shov. It's the Ketores which is worthless. Because not only doesn't it give off the fragrance, it has a stench. Because the people who fail, not taking them under your wing and be concerned about them, and people not be concerned about one another, but rather only about themselves. Therefore, each one is seen as a separate entity. But if it's a Tibbur, which is a unification, which no one has an identity, even the one who fails or is lagging, he's coalesced, he's part of the totality, and that's Klal, so that's the Tibbur. So Korban Tibbur, when we speak about a Korban Tibbur, no one has more, no one has less. It's a representation of the Jewish people, this Korban. That's Korban Tibbur. So since the Matzah Shekel, the half a silver coin that was given, which only the male above the age of 20 was obligated to give it, which was the basis for the purchase of the Korbanei Tibbur, of the communal offerings, ha'osher lo yarbeh, the wealthy man does not give more, even if he wants to give more. The poor man does not give less than the Matzah Shekel. Everyone, there's a uniformity among all Jews. Nobody can be identified, regardless of what his economic background is, what his spiritual background is. It doesn't make a difference. Everyone is equal. Everyone is anonymous. And only because that anonymity, where nobody could be identified, that allows everyone to unify, and that's the Korban Tibbur. And that's the basis for the purchase of all the communal offerings. Now, the Gemara tells us in Megillah, this has to do with Haman, that Haman, to be able to convince Achashverosh, the Persian emperor, to seal the fate of the Jews, to allow him to issue a decree, lahashmid la'arog la'abed, to kill, to destroy, and to annihilate every man, woman, and child, from whether aged or young, and even the children. He paid for this. He paid 10,000 in bullion, 10,000 silver in bullion. That's what he paid. And when he gave that to Achashverosh says, he took his ring, gave it to Haman, and Haman was able to allow this decree to be issued against the Jews. But whenever HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings a makkah, brings a plight upon the Jewish people, he always provides the refuah code of the makkah. The remedy is in place before the makkah. And as a result of that, that did not allow the decree to take effect. It took effect, but it wasn't meant to be. What was that? Because the Jews in Adar, which is this month of Adar, it's when the miracle of Purim took place. The Mishnah tells us, Shkolim mashmim al shkolim. Let's say every year, the Jews, they sent the Matzah Shekel to Shalayim, and there was a chamber on the Temple Mount where they would store all these coins. And the coins, literally, the room was a large room, was filled with coins from floor literally up to the ceiling. Every Nisan, the Korbanei Tibbur, the communal offerings, had to be purchased from new coins. They couldn't be purchased from last year's coins. There's a mitzvah every year they had to be purchased from new coins. So every Adar, which is the month before Nisan, they'd already announced that Jews, wherever they may be, they have to send in the half coins, the half silver coins. So when Nisan, when Rosh Chodesh Nisan came, there was enough money there to purchase whatever communal offerings were needed, were purchased from the new coins. So how did they differentiate between the old coins and the new coins? So every year, let's say the first year they had the matzah shekel, and there was tremendous amount left from the previous year, but they weren't supposed to use the coins of the previous year. They would take a leather mat, like a tarp, cover over last year's coins, and the new coins, they would put on top of that mat, that leather tarp, and those were the new coins. And every year, they would, to differentiate between the new coins and the old coins, they would take that tarp made of leather, and that would separate between the old coins and the new coins. And that's how they would purchase the matzah shekel. They purchased the Korbanei Tibbur, the communal offerings, with the silver coins. Haman calculated, he's going to give enough silver, which corresponds to the Jewish people. And that's how he's going to seal the fate of the Jews. God says, you may want to seal the fate of the Jews, but this is only a superficial situation. They may believe they're going to be destroyed, but ultimately, because they have a schus, they have the merit of matzah shekel, which is a silver coin, which hadal oshelo yarbe, which the rich man doesn't give more than half a coin, and the poor man doesn't give less than half a coin, which this is uniformity among Jews. Due to that, the merit of those silver coins will preempt and annul the value of the coins that Haman gave to Achashverosh. That's the refuah kodem lamaka. That was the remedy that was in place to preempt the makkah, the plight that he tried to bring upon us. That's the Gemara Megillah. So that's the value of the matzah shekel. Now, the Sifano writes over here, in this particular situation where the Torah speaks about the matzah shekel, Kisisas Rosh Bnei Yisrael Lifkudeim. When you count the heads of the Jewish people according to their number, each person has to give an atonement for his soul to Hashem, and as a result of that, because they're giving an atonement, which is the matzah shekel, which is for the Korbanei Tibbur, for the communal offering, which is the atonement, v'lo yibem negev. As a result of that, lo yeh negev b'vkorosam. There will not be a plague when they're counted. This is to preempt the plague. Since the value of the half a silver coin is specifically for the purpose of atonement, therefore, when they will be counted, that will avert a plague. I mean, what does counting have to do with a plague? We know Jews, there's a Torah violation that Jews are not counted. Whenever Jews were counted, they were always counted through the medium of the matzah shekel. Now, how does that somehow preempt the plague? So it says explicitly, because what do you use this matzah shekel for? Use the matzah shekel for the communal offerings, which is kapara, which is atonement. Therefore, though the counting should cause plague, but since the usage of these coins are for kapara, therefore that kapara will avert the plague. What does one thing have to do with another? So here there's a beautiful Sifarno. The Sifarno explains that when you count a person, what does that mean? There's a certain individualization of that person. You're an individual. You're recognized for who you are. When a person is recognized for who he is, now, we mentioned many times, name it a Ramchal, name it a Ramak, Ramoshe Kurdeviro, that what is Midas HaRachmim, what is Midas Adin? The attribute of mercy, the attribute of justice. No one has a perfect record. No one. So if we don't have a perfect record, and it's far from perfect, why is there Rachmim? Because the only time there's the attribute of justice is put in place is when Hashem allows Satan, who's the prosecutor of Jewish people, to audit the record. If the record is audited, we have a problem. If the record is not audited, although the record is flawed and checkered, it doesn't make a difference. The Midas HaRachman remains in place. This is what happens. What is Midas? What activates the audit? Well, we know Rosh Hashanah is the Yom Adin. They have judgment. Everybody's record is audited. It's they have judgment. What silences the prosecution of Satan? That's the schus of the Akedah. When the shofar is blown, which represents the Akedah Yitzchak, which is the ultimate merit of Klal Yisrael, Satan is silenced. That's what happens. Meaning the prosecution ceases. The record is still flawed, but if he is not able to prosecute, the Midas HaRachmim is reinstated. We say before Tkiyah Shofar Rosh Hashanah, Lamtzeach Levnei Korach Mizmor. We say it 7 times. In that chapter of Tilim, David HaMelech says, Ola Elokim B'Tshua, Hashem B'Kol Shofar. Hashem ascended with the sound of, it says Elokim, with the sound of Tshua. Hashem, Yudke Vovke, which is Midas HaRachmim, Hashem B'Kol Shofar, with the sound of the shofar. So the Medrash tells us, when Rosh Hashanah begins, Hashem is Oler al Kisei Hadin. God ascends the throne of justice. This is why he listens to the prosecution of Satan. That's Elokim. Elokim is the appellation of Midas Hadin. The moment the shofar is sounded, Yored Mikisei Hadin, he descends from the throne of justice, V'ole al Kisei Rachmim, and he ascends the throne of Rachmim, of mercy. That's Yudke Vovke. The Yudke Vovke is the appellation of Midas HaRachmim. When he hears the shofar, which represents the Akedah, because Satan is silenced, therefore Hashem ascends the throne of mercy. That's the understanding. When you individualize a person says, who am I? I am. The moment you say I am, the question is, who are you? And once they ask, who are you? It becomes a problem. Who are you means you're being identified for who you are. If you blend into the crowd, so to say, I am part of the Jewish people. I don't have an identity. My accomplishments are irrelevant. All I am, I'm a member of Klal Yisrael. But that is an expression of humility also. That humility doesn't allow you to be identified as that individual. As a result of that, there's no prosecution. The Gemara tells us in Brachos that a person is mechavein b'tfiloso. Yeah, a person has kavana during his Shmon Esrei, it activates the audit. Could you imagine? I mean, here the person prays intensely with kavana. That's what actually causes the prosecution. So Tosas explains. Let's say a person prays well, very well, and because you prayed so well, you feel Hashem owes it to you. You pray, a person is mispalel, prays for a certain particular request, purpose. And he feels that since he really invested so much in the supplication, Hashem owes it to him. If you have an attitude, God owes you anything, instead that creates a problem. Because if you say God owes it to you, and you're so special, they ask, by the way, who is this person? Who is he? The moment they ask, who are you? What do? They pull out the record. They pull out that record, they start auditing the record. If they audit that record, God forbid, chas v'sholom, that's the Midas Hadin. That's the attribute of justice. Therefore, we want to maintain the anonymity that we should not be recognized as the individual. So therefore, when you count people, automatically you're identifying, individualizing the people. So there's right away, there's a prosecution, because you're being identified as that individual. That's the individualization of the person. Tell me what the Sifarno explains. So immediately it says, so what do you do with that? Well, we have to know the number. You take that half a silver coin and you purchase the Korban Tibbur. communal offering, which its value is atonement. And what is Tibbur? Tibbur means community, as we explained before. I have no identity. I am committed to the cause of the Tibbur, everybody else. I'm part of the whole. And if you're part of the whole, that is the atonement for the individualization of the person. That's the understanding. Now, so now there's a famous word from the Modus Halevi. That's, he writes, when Haman had come to really put the salt on the wounds of anti-Semitism with Achashverosh, one of the things he said, you have this people, Mefozar, Meforad Bein Amim, Mefozar, Umeforad. They're spread and the fractionalize. Pirud means to break up. Meforad Bein Amim. It's the antithesis of unity. So the Gemara Megillah says, Achashverosh was a rabid anti-Semite. Of course, Haman was worse. And he says, there's this nation among all the nations, they don't respect the king. They're not dedicated to the king. And he goes, tells him why. He says, if a fly falls into the wine of a Jew, you know what the Jew does? He takes the fly out, drinks the wine. But if the king would touch that wine, the Jew takes the wine and pours it out, would not drink it. These are worthy subjects. And the Gemara says that nobody was able to speak Lashon Hara like Haman. When it came to castigate the Jews and to denigrate them, he was the expert. And he said things to Achashverosh that, which he put it, literally, he touched a nerve, he became incensed. And that's why, in addition to the money that he'd given, the silver bullion, he allowed the decree to be issued. But Achashverosh responded to every one of the points. He said, we should destroy them. He says, you realize I'm a king. Regardless who they are my subjects. So if the Jews are going to be destroyed, it's going to create a gap in my kingdom. I have less subjects. So Haman says to Achashverosh, they're spread, they're scattered among all the nations. You won't even notice it. You won't even notice it. Okay, this is what the Gemara explains. That's the meaning of Mefozar Meforad Bein Amim. So therefore, there won't be a gap in your kingdom because they're interspersed. There's no concentration of Jews in one location. That's the Gemara. So the Monos Levi writes what he said. These Jews, what are you concerned? They could launch a rebellion against me. He says no, because they're not unified. They're not unified. But why aren't they not unified? Because the sinas chinam. That because they're not committed to one another. Each one is tooting his own horn. And each person is interested in himself, not in the other. Therefore, you have nothing to be concerned. Even if there'll be a decree issued to annihilate them, there's not enough unification that you have to be concerned about them. This is what it's about. So why did the Machzah Shekel preempt what he tried to do, Haman? The Machzah Shekel represents the unification of the Jewish people, as we just said. There's a uniformity. Ha'oshelo yarbe. The rich man does not give more than half a silver coin, and the poor man does not give less than a silver coin. So that anonymous presentation of oneself, it's actually, there's no individualization of the person. Therefore, that is the atonement for that. It's me and you. It's me and not you, and you, it's not me. Mashiach represents, it's us, it's we. We find that Moshe Rabbeinu, before he passes away, he says to the Jewish people, Atem nitzov hayom, kulchem lefnei Hashem Elokechem. This is the last day of Moshe's life. He says, Atem nitzovim hayom. You stand strongly today, kulchem, all together. So the Medrash says, if it's kulchem, atem nitzovim. If you're unified, then you stand permanently. You stand securely. If it's not kulchem, if there's no unity among yourselves, you do not stand, you will fall. That's what he said to them. The unity is crucial, is essential for the survival, for the eternity of Klal Yisrael. The Matzah Shek, why? Because again, the moment is this individualization. It's me and you. Besides, we see Lashon Hara and all the other bad things that come because of that lack of unity. But it's the individualization. The moment we identify as I and you, then we talk about record. We talk about the auditing of the record. And we want to avoid that, especially when it comes to kapara, to atonement. We want to be atoned. You know, it's interesting. We find that at the beginning of creation, the Torah describes the state of affairs of what the world looked like. It says, Haaretz hayatov v'vo. The world was unformed, chaotic. V'choshech al pnei som. There was darkness over the deep water. V'ruach Elokim rachefes al pnei hamoyim. And the spirit of Hashem was hovering over the water. Torah describes, it depicts exact what was the state of affairs at the beginning of creation. So as I mentioned last week, the Medrash says over there, Tohu is the exile, the Babylonian exile. That's Tohu. Vo, and quotes a pasuk from Daniel. Vo is what is Porsa Modai. As it says, Vayevilu es Haman. They brought Haman to the party of Esther in like a bewildered state. He was rushed. Choshech, darkness, is Yovan, is Greeks. They blackened their eyes with the decrees. Whose Tahom means the water that there's no end to how deep it is. Zemalchus Edom. That's the Edomite exile. That's the exile we're in right now. That it's the longest exile. It's over 2,000 years. Just as there's no end to the depths of the water, there's no end. The spirit of Mashiach is hovering over the water. What's the water represent? Rucho shel Mashiach is merachefes al pnei hamoyim. What's moyim? Tshuva. It's contingent on the Jews doing tshuva. Why tshuva? Why is tshuva associated with water? As it says in Eicha, we read on Tisha B'Av, Shivchi kamayim libech. When you do tshuva, the heart gushes with what? With tears, with water. When a person is brokenhearted and you feel devastated because you're ashamed of your past record, then a person cries. That's an indication of sincere remorse. Shivchi kamayim libech. So what is the rucha, the spirit of Mashiach, contingent on? Tshuva, which is associated with water. So the question is, why is that such a crucial piece? Mayim is a maral. It's very interesting. We once discussed this. A person's contaminated, spiritual contamination. So the Torah says that he has to immerse himself in a mikvah. Mikvah shel mayim, a body of water which is gathered which meets certain criteria, what a mikvah is, or a wellspring, known as a mayon. If he fully immerses himself in the mikvah, in the gathered water, or in the mayon, in the natural body of water, and he immerses himself totally, when he comes out, he's relieved of that impurity, that spiritual impurity. What happens if a person immerses himself and one hair sticks out above the water, is not submerged? It's not a valid tefillah. It's not a valid immersion. It has to be totally submerged. When you're totally submerged, you come out, then you've been relieved of that contamination. We're talking about when you immerse yourself, when the Torah says you're permitted to immerse yourself. You come out, you're a new person. You're relieved. The question is, what happened to the contamination? What is the concept? Why, when you totally immerse yourself, and even if there's a hair which is not under submerged, the tefillah is not valid? What's the concept? So there's a maral on Hanukkah. He speaks about the dream of Daniel. Daniel saw these animals coming in from the ocean. And they came onto dry land, And these animals, each one represents one of the exiles. Whether it's Bavel, the Babylonian, the Persian, the Greeks, and the Edomites. And it says they're coming in from the water. So he says, what's the concept of the ocean? So he explains, if you have an armada of ships on the ocean, and there's gale winds and there's typhoons and everything, as many people you have in the ocean is not a location for humanity to live. That's not their location. Humanity cannot exist on the ocean. Humanity needs dry land. The ocean totally subsumes the identity of a human being, or anything. Anything in the ocean is subsumed. You have no identity in the water. So when he saw the animals representing the four exiles emerging from the water coming, that means they're going from a state of non-existence into existence, coming onto the dry land. I'm explaining to the Maharal how he explains this. So he says, that's why it's coming into reality. So the takeaway from the Maharal is, a person comes in contact with something which contaminates it. Torah says, when you submerge yourself in this body of water, which contains so much volume of water, and the water met certain criteria, you go from a state of existence into a state of non-existence. When you emerge from that state of non-existence, you emerge as a new being. You're no longer that same person. As a result of that, the person who was previously, who had relevance to this contamination, when he comes out, he's no longer contaminated. That's the concept of why you have to be fully submerged, and only then when you come out are you relieved of the contamination. Therefore, if there's even as much as a hair sticking out of the water, that means you don't go into that state of non-existence. That means this part of the previous existence existing, you're not relieved of the contamination. It's only if you're fully submerged and now you come out, now you assume that state of purity for that reason. That's the concept. Shivchi kamayim libech. When your heart gushes forth, when a person's devastated, what does devastation mean? What does a person do? Many things in life. I feel entitled. I have a right. It's me. It's I. And therefore we behave a certain way. A person has humility. What's humility? Humility is a negation of oneself. That's humility. It's not the I. It's the objective. That's what humility is. A person who does tshuva, he recognizes the wrong of the transgression, and he has remorse. And if the remorse is deep enough, he's devastated. Where did I have the audacity to cross that line and go against the will of Hashem? How did I behave this way? So what does that do? It's devastation. You feel broken. And because you feel broken, that causes you to cry. So the crying of tshuva, I was in state of being, and when I have the true remorse, I'm no longer that same person. I'm broken. It's like you take a vessel, a human being is compared to a earthenware vessel. Earthenware vessel, once it becomes contaminated, you can't purify it. You can't put it in the mikveh. And the Torah says, how do you purify an earthenware vessel? You have to break it. When it's broken, it's no longer that original vessel. That's the concept. I've given up my identity because the basis for the sin is my identity, because I feel it's I, and therefore I have a right. I'm entitled to do whatever I'm entitled to do. Tshuva is a recognition you're not entitled to anything. You're God's subject. And if you're God's subject, you must follow his dictate, whatever that dictate may be. Even to the point where you must give your life if he tells you to give your life for him. That's what it's about. There's a beautiful word from Rabbi Simcha Vinsk. In this same vein, we find that the Isha Shunamis, she came to, and she had no children. And Elio wanted to do something for her. Elio wanted to do something for her. And he said to her, because she hosted him, would you want me to speak to the king? Would you want me to speak to the minister? Whatever you want, I'll do for you. meaning I will go to the upper echelons and do whatever I can on your behalf to show my appreciation of what you did for me, that you should be able to have a child. So she answered him, I want to be just an anonymous person. I'm an ordinary Jewess. I don't want any recognition. I sit like everybody else. I'm a regular citizen among my people. So Meir Simcha Dvinsk cites a Zohar. What exactly was Elio saying to this Isha Shunamis? He was saying that day was Rosh Hashanah. It was the Yom Adin, it's the Day of Judgment. Elio says, I could come before the holy throne of Hashem and petition on your behalf that you should be able to have a child. She says, but you realize if you petition on my behalf, that means why you petition on my behalf, not on anybody else's behalf? That means I'm special. The moment I'm identified as special, the question they ask is, why is she so special? And if once they ask that question, it opens a can of worms, because that means that's a basis to audit the record. And as a result of that, I'm concerned the most intense level of din, of justice, will be brought against me. Because once they start putting my record under that magnifying glass and going through it with a fine-tooth comb, I'll have a problem. She says, do me a favor. I prefer to be this anonymous citizen, not to be identified because I'm special. I'm not special. Because the moment you identify as special, there's a problem. That's how Rameir Simcha Vince cites the Zohar. That was the conversation between the special woman and Eliyahu Novi. So the story of Rameir Simcha Vinsk. Rameir Simcha Vinsk, among the great Torah sages in the later part of the 19th, 20th century, towards the end of his life, he was very sick. And they came to him, they said, we're willing to say Tehillim in all these shivas of Europe, that all the people who are studying Torah will say Tehillim on your behalf for your recovery. He says, I prefer not. We'll have a special Tehillim for you. He says, I prefer not. Because if you pray for me differently, you pray for everyone else, that means I'm special. And if I'm special, that means they're going to audit my record differently than they audit anybody else's record. And he cited the Zohar regarding the conversation of Elio and Isha Shunamis. I prefer to be an ordinary citizen like everyone else. You want to include my name among other people who are not well, that's not a problem. But that I should have a special day of tefillah for me, that means I'm special. The moment I'm identified as special, that creates a problem. That's the individualization of a person. Once you individualize for whatever reason, that activates the prosecution, because that is the basis for the audit on one's record. That's the story of Meir Simcha of Dvinsk.
Rob, I have a question.
Wait 1 second.
Unless you're recording.
I am recording. So as a result of that, the Torah says here that the Jews are counted with the machzah shekel, which is half a coin. The rich person does not give more than half a coin. The poor man does not give less. But if you count it, there's the individualization. So individualization causes prosecution. You give it l'chaper. It will be given for atonement. So simultaneously, it's being used to atone, because the base prosecution is the imperfect record. But since it's given for atonement and it's the context of Tibbur, there will have no identification, because that's how the kapara, that's how the atonement comes about. It's not a problem. That's the way it's done. Okay? We find in the Mishkan, there was one other time, Rashi at the beginning of Truma points this out. The only time the Jews gave machzah shekel was either to purchase the communal offerings, also for the Adonim. The Mishkan, there were these vertical beams. Now, how did they stand? What secured them? There were sockets made of silver. Actually Mishkan itself, there were these vertical beams, and they were inserted, there were like two pegs that were on the bottom, and they were inserted in silver sockets. Now, the silver, where did it come from? Did Jews just give silver? No. the Adonim were made of the Machzah Shekel. They had to give specifically Machzah Shekel for those Adonim, for those sockets. Again, you find interesting. We just explained when it comes to the Korbanei Tibbur, to the communal offerings, there's this uniformity. Nobody has any identity. And that's why it brings kapora. That's Tibbur. But what about the sockets? Also, over there, Machzah Shekel. Osher lo yarbe, the rich man does not give more, the poor man does not give less. Why? Now, when you build a building, what determines the stability and the lasting and the strength of that the durability of that building? It depends. Everything depends on the foundation. If the foundation is secure, and the higher the building, the deeper the foundation. That if the foundation is made with quality material and it's deep enough, then it's able to hold that structure. But if there's a faulty foundation, actually that building is going to crumple and collapse. What are the Adonim? The Adonim is the basis for the stability of the Mishkan. The sockets made of silver. The sockets is the foundation of Klal Yisrael. This is Vayichan. This is the anonymity of the Jewish people. The socket, which is the foundation, which gives this stability for those vertical beams, which represents the Shekhinah dwelling in our midst. Osher lo yarbe, oni lo yabed. The rich man does not give more than a half a coin. The poor man does not give less than a half a coin. That's what happens. Because if in the foundation you already find this flaw, which is called individualism, it's me, it's you. And although I mean l'shem shamayim, it doesn't make a difference. But I'm demonstrating my individualism. I give that, you gave that. It creates a problem. Therefore, the Adonim, which is the foundation, which secures the vertical beams, again, you have to have this anonymity that nobody has any identification. Therefore, there's a Machzah Shekel even regarding the sockets, which provides the stability for those vertical beams. Now, at the beginning of Parshas Bamidbar, which is called Numbers, we find there is a famous Ramban. He writes about the sin of David HaMelech. David HaMelech counted the Jewish people when he was king. And because he counted the Jewish people, there was a plague. And his general says to him, you shouldn't count them. Because it says in the Torah, Lo Yisofim Mirov. The Jews should not be counted because of their great numbers. Therefore, they should not be counted. Lo Yisofim Mirov. Because they're so numerous, they should not be counted. So the question is, if they could be counted, evidently they're so numerous. That's why then they have reached that critical number that you can't count them, you can't quantify it. So why is it lo yisofim mirov? They should not be counted because they're abundant number. So Ramban explains, David HaMelech was the greatest Torah sage of the Jewish people. The Gemara tells in Sanhedrin that every halachic ruling David gave was always accurate. He merited the siyata d'shmaya, the clarity that he never made a mistake in his halachic rulings. And something that he says, a elementary school child knows that Jews don't count one another. How did David count? How did he count the Jews? We'd say he didn't use the Machzah Shekel. He didn't use a medium. It says if you're supposed to use Machzah Shekel. So Ramban writes over there that even when you count the Jewish people, they have to be counted for a purpose. Meaning, if you're going to war, because we have a principle in Somchen al Nes, we don't rely on miracle. We have a standing army. That's called purpose. To be counted for a purpose. When you count for a purpose, but just to be counted, because you want to know how many citizens, how many subjects you have, that has to do with individualization. And that's not, even though the coins be used for something, using a medium, it's not enough reason. If you have to count them, because we say it's conscripted into the army only if you're above 20 years old. So even when you count them for conscription, there's this individualization. You have to counter it with using the coin for the Korban Tibbur, for the communal offering. But just to count them to know the number, that's not enough reason. Even if you use the coins for the Korbanei Tibbur. And since David counted him, not for that reason, it brought about plague. So it's interesting. The Jews Avram Avinu, the others were told the Jews will be numerous like the stars. As you can't count the stars, you can't quantify the Jews. As you can't count the sand on the beaches. You can't count the Jews, but actually we never reached that number. We went beyond the number to be quantified. So what do we be like Kochlei Shemaim L'Rov? As you can't count the stars in the heaven, you can't count the Jewish people. What does it mean? We're not talking about quantitative, we're talking about qualitative. To be able to understand the innate value of every Jew, only God knows that value. Only God. So therefore, the moment you go and you count them, what are you saying? It's not the it's quantitative. God says you're missing the point. It's not number, it's not the physical number. It's who you are. Who are we? We're the Am Hashem. Being God's people, that gives us that value. So whether you have 10 Jews, whether you have 1,000 Jews, the innate value of the Jew is because our connection to him. The moment you distort that reality and say, no, it's the number. Once you say number, Hashem says, I'll teach you a lesson. It's not number. And as a result of that, what did it engender? It brought a plague. The Jews died as a result of this counting, which Hashem is saying clearly, it's not number. It's who we are, who you are. Who are you? You're my people. That's the connection. As a result of that, that's what means Lo Yisok Mirov. You don't count Jews because of their numbers. Because what we're all about is not numbers. It's we have the Am Hashem. The Jewish people throughout history has always been the smallest number versus nations of the world. Well, less than a speck on the spectrum in terms of number in world, quantitative number. But yet we survived everything, and we're still here. The answer is because we're Am Hashem, because we're God's people. And Hashem says, as I am eternal, you my people, you're eternal. Therefore, regardless, you'll always be eternal, and your number means nothing. And whenever you go and take the wrong route and you emphasize the material, the number, rather than me, that's when, unfortunately, we actually fall rather than rise. Ready for our halacha.
Yeah, Rabbi, I have a question.